Hey everyone, and welcome to I'm Finished, my part 5, final part of my Procreate 4 process videos. Alright, so I just quickly threw in this background. It's not super special, but I thought that since this is the last video in the series, we would just do a full recap here on the time lapse so you could see exactly where we came from, how we got there, and the last quick bits about that background. So here is the rough sketch phase. This is when we were figuring everything out. Then this is that was the super rough. This is the rough. Now we have some basis by which we can base our flats and eventually our painting off of. Just sort of running through this super quickly, all fat pencil. And then we get to the actual flatting process here, which in some ways is like the most time consuming and tedious, especially depending on how complicated the piece is. But for this, it was fairly easy. So then we get to the rendering once the flatting is done, which depending on the style of rendering you're going for, it can either be really long or really short. It just sort of depends. So here it is in time lapse. You can see everything, including the teeth getting rendered, which I left out of the actual time-lapsey, or not time-lapse, the screen capture part of it. So here we are making the lips part of the facial anatomy, adding in the next layer up on the skin. There's the dark part of the skin where we push that nose forward. Here are all those little skin tweaks, and then adding in the eyes and putting the shine in there. And now here's the teeth, where we quickly banged out some decent teeth with a mouth. Put a little bit of rim lighting and stuff like that on it. And then we threw in a background. Okay, so the background was just thrown in so I could show you guys a couple of finishing techniques. I get a lot of questions on these and the way Procreate records things. They kind of come out real quick in the replay. So first, let's clean up all of our folders. So we're going to take the mouth folder, name that mouth. We've got the eyes, name that eyes. And then because the rest of this is all just sort of bullshit, we're going to take all of this and we're just going to call it like never gonna finish. We'll take this and just call it background. That way we have everything clear for when we start doing sort of little finishing tricks. Finishing Twix. I could go for a Twix right now. Okay, and then it was just stuff, and then the whole thing is in there, which we'll just call that something like all. Okay, now we can start with the last pass you would do on something before you were absolutely done with it. Something that I think a lot of people aren't very aware of, and I use it to do a lot of final finishing things, is the copy canvas function in Procreate. So here we're going to create a new layer on top of everything. Then we're going to go to image, and we're going, see, I always think it's in canvas, but it's actually an image. And then we click on copy canvas right there. So that copies everything that's visible. Now we're going to say paste, and it's going to paste all the visible layers into one new layer. Now this is super helpful for doing lots of tweaks to the image. But now here's another thing you may not know is since it's everything that's visible, if you turn off the background layers and you do it again, you actually can just get like the silhouette of your form all on one layer. So here, I'll turn that out so you can see that. There it is right there. So you can use this for selections and doing a lot of really cool stuff, which is really nice. So let's turn everything back on again, and we're going to use that duplicate that we made of the entire canvas. We're going to duplicate it again so we can just work with these two really simple layers for a second. And then we're going to do a Gaussian blur. So this would be a good way to start doing tricks for a depth of field type thing. So here we're going to blur it, and then we're going to use the mask ability, which you haven't seen me do yet, but I would use it from time to time. And this way it's non-destructive. So we can go and on that layer mask right there, we will use black. Black means no, I don't want it. White means yes, I do want it. That's the easiest way to think of it. And so using a soft brush, we'll just paint some black on that. And you can see it starts masking away that layer, that blurred layer, so that we can see the sharper picture that we have underneath. Now that's a pretty ham-fisted way of doing it, but it's also really simple and fairly effective. You can then also adjust the opacity of that layer to sort of tweak exactly what you're doing there. But there's also a slightly more subtle way that we can do this, where we can duplicate that layer twice actually. And we take that topmost layer and we blur it the most. So we do it just like we did it a second ago, like that. Let's turn that one off for a second and go here and blur it just a little bit, like that. And now what we can do is we can create a more gradiated blur here. So we go to the one that we've just blurred a little bit, we add the mask, and then we paint away what we want to be sharp. Then we turn on the next one and we add a mask to that. And then we make this bigger. We make it bigger and softer. And so now what we have is we have essentially a soft range around the outside that's super blurred, a range in the middle that's less blurred, and then we have our original sharp image underneath. Now you can do this. This is like a way to do it like it's just sort of a broad blurring. It's like a vignette blurring. But you can also do this by having all your individual layers copied and pasted and blurred. So if you want to do like a true depth of field, you can do stuff like that, which is pretty nice. So let's get rid of that for a second. And here's another trick that you may use. Now, this is going to be a really sort of, heavy-handed way of doing this. I wouldn't recommend doing it exactly how I'm doing it right now, but what I'm doing here is taking just the form of her and blurring it. That's one thing that you can do. You can also take this and put it in the back of your stack to try and soften the edges of some of what you've painted. Now, this is too blurred. I wouldn't blur it that much if I were trying to just soften the edges, but you can also take that and like duplicate it up a bunch of times in order to try and soften the edges of what you're going for. So now what I did was I undid all the way back to before I had blurred that individual of her. So now I'm just going to blur a little bit, not a full crazy blur like I did a second ago, just a little bit. And then I'm going to duplicate that a few times, and it's going to create a lot of soft edging around her. Now it looks more just like a shitty drop shadow right now, which really isn't the look that you'd be going for. But if this were all rendered up, it's a way to soften some of your edges if you're just looking to do that. And then you can do like what I'm doing here, which is erase away certain things. And just another trick. Basically all I'm saying is put some thought towards ways that you can leverage the copy canvas mechanic. That way you can use individual components or the entire image to try and create different looks for finish quality. Now let's talk about adding noise. This is the way that I find is the best way to add noise. Instead of committing it to an actual art layer, you create a white layer and then you just add noise to that. Once you've added noise, here it is zoomed in so you can see, you just set that layer to multiply, and that's going to make all of the white transparent, and anything that's going dark, so anything going from white to dark, gets gradually darker and more opaque. That's how you can add this noise look. Now this is another thing I do, is I'll blow up that noise layer so that the chunks of the noise, the little pixels of the noise, are actually bigger, and then I'll control the opacity of that to try and lessen it, but at least then it has some sort of texture to it. And then the very last thing is, sometimes just to get distortion across the entire image, I'll blow the noise layer up huge so it does this, which right now isn't much, but you can see that it creates this wild variant across the entire thing, which sometimes can create some amount of noise or distortion that you could be looking for, just to give your image more variation. Well, here is another thing that I did recently in a couple of images, and I thought I would just break it out here so you can see. If you use that copy canvas ability and you copy just her over, you can use her silhouette to do a bunch of other little tricky things. So here's just a quick example of that, is by selecting her, or just yeah, selecting her is the best way, but you can select her and then you can just fill that new layer that you created with whatever color you want it to be. Now you can use this for colorization, you can use this for just about anything, but in this particular case I'm going to use it for lighting. So I'll make it sort of this dark blue, and then I'll switch that to multiply, and then I'll adjust the opacity as I see fit. I'm not going to do it quite yet, but I'll adjust as I see fit. As you can see now, she is like silhouetted very heavily against this bright background, and then you can use the masking to then pull away from that shadow. So again, you use a black brush because black means I don't want it, white means I do want it, and you can do something like that, which is just a, you know, streak of light going across her face. And then there I am adjusting the opacity so I can decide how intense I'm going to make it. And now I'll just fill that layer with white to get it back to the way it's supposed to be, I should say, which is just no mask at all. And then let's go in and try something that's a little bit more detailed, where we actually try to paint in some sort of source of light. And so I'm doing this very crudely just to get the point across. Another thing you can do is you can actually reach into your layers that you have, which theoretically have like just the hair blocked out or just the eyes blocked out or whatever, and you can actually use that to trap the area that you'd want to erase on this master layer. So you'll see me do that here in a second. So see, we've got some rim lighting coming from the other side, and then I'll actually go into the layers and I'll select that chunk of hair that she has in the front. So let's go through all that. We go back to stuff, because I didn't really name it intelligently. Select her bangs and that little lock of hair, and then you can go in here and put this streak across it so that the light is catching it just a little bit. So that's just sort of like one thing you can do. Oh yeah, here I'm also selecting the glints in her eyes and erasing that away from the shadow so that those are just super bright. So that's another thing that you can do with selecting just her and copying her with the copy canvas, and then being able to, you know, manipulate that as you see fit. So without going into absolutely every detail, I hope that this 5-parter was helpful in showing my process with some of the changes that have occurred in Procreate 4. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the videos. If you do, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.